several years passed before they actually got any public water for Bristol. And the time when they did get it, it was divided between the cities. It was not the same project. Bristol, Tennessee early got water from the lower King Spring. So many people live here in Bristol and don't know about that big, beautiful spring. I put it in the newspaper one time, and I don't know how many people told me, well, I never knew that was there, and they tell me I went down to see it. It's located at the backside of what looks like a meadow in DeFreeze Park, here where Stein Street and Fifth Street intersect. Big spring, makes a big pond. Well, that's where Bristol, Tennessee got their first water. They built a tank up on the hill, pumped it up to the tank, and it served for many years that way, until they found out it was contaminated. Now, there's not much way of assuring people in those days that the water was safe. I read an old diary of a woman living on Alabama Street would remark, and not only was it not certain to be pure, it was also undependable. I remember one entry in her book, Little Dice, said no water in the pipes for 3 days. And another place she entered, we have to boil all the water now. People suspected they were getting typhoid from that spring. Well, that eventually had to cease as a source for Bristol, Tennessee. Then they went to the Henry Preston Spring, which is the actual beginning of what some people call Sinking Creek and others call it Paperville Creek. The Virginian, that real nice development and so on up there now, has that spring within its limits. The only time I ever got to see it is when they were building that and wanted to go up there and give them the history of that spring. That was piped into Bristol, Tennessee for a long time. About the same time, Bristol, Virginia began to look for a good water source. They first drilled an artesian well, just about in the middle of what's now Piedmont, about where Oakview and Piedmont run together. And they did get an abundance of water, but it was immediately learned that it was not pure, because nearby was Burson's notorious Row, a slum area that had no indoor plumbing, and they found out as being polluted from the outside toilets that were built along with that slum row up there, and they had to cap the well almost as soon as it was finished. Then they bought some land way up on what some people call Moore's Creek or Mumpower Creek. I'd say about 3 miles out in the country on the Benham's Road. There were a number of springs there in the bottom, and they all formed into a creek and started flowing toward Bristol. It's actually a branch of Beaver Creek, but some people now call it Moore's Creek or Mumpower Creek. They went out there and built a reservoir out of cut stone. And you know what? Today, driving out the Benham's Road, you can see that reservoir. It's still there. It's dry now, but the reservoir is actually still there. It's to the left of the road just before you cross Moore's Creek or Mumpower Creek in the main curve there. A year or two ago, it filled up again. We had a real water spout one afternoon, and that thing filled up again, and I've got a picture of it. I'm going to run it in the paper real soon with the story. They piped that water into Bristol, and it worked out pretty good. Now, bear in mind that at first, hardly anybody had indoor water. Most of them just had a faucet out in the yard, and they still carried it with a bucket into the house. A little later, they did get indoor plumbing, and it was put in the house. At first, it was not metered. They had a certain flat rate, and strangely, they based it on the number of rooms in the house. But at the very best, it hardly ever was over $1 per month. You just paid a flat rate and turned it in, and that was the amount. Somewhere here, I wish I could have found it for this program, but it's buried in thousands of old papers here all over the house somewhere. I have an old water bill sent to a family that lived on Solar Hill right back of me here. And it was in the fall, so they gave notice in that bill that the bill will remain the same this winter whether you take a bath or not. Of course, naturally, they'd use more water if they took a bath. But they said, now we will have the same amount through the winter, whether you're going to bathe this winter or not. Well, that's changing times, of course. Nobody would want to think of that now. Well, that worked for a while. Then they got into a lawsuit with a man who lived above it, who they accused of polluting the water by running stock in the meadows where the springs were. And that had to give way, and so they went just above Wallace to the other Preston Spring and began to get water there. You can still see the reservoir box by the road up there, right in the town of, little town, village, whatever, of Wallace. At the same time, Bristol, Tennessee was getting water from the Henry Preston Spring up in what's now the Virginian. That actually, to me, looks like a creek flowing out from under a hill. And it may well be that it is a creek that sunk somewhere or another and came out of the hill. Now, the other Preston Spring at Wallace is not of that type. It's a big spring, but it doesn't run out from under a hill like a stream. It's just a big lake-like thing. It's under shelter. I've been fortunate enough to go in the shelter and see the Preston Spring. Well, all of these systems did the best they could, but they were not all suitable at all times. Eventually, metered service was started in Bristol. People began to put bathrooms in their homes, and so it came to the point where they were doing pretty well. It had to have enough pressure that it would shoot a stream of water over a house on the top of Solar Hill, right to the back of my home. And it did get that pressure by changing the diameter of the pipes as they came down through thousands of feet between here and the reservoir. Next time you're out Benham's Road, take a look. If you wonder what that cut stone thing is on the left, wall still sticking up, nothing in it. I guess there's grass and bushes are growing down in it now. Snaky, they tell me. That is where Bristol, Virginia got their water for a long time. Well, eventually, we reached the point where the lake out in the Holston Valley was built, South Holston Dam put in, and now we have a superabundance of water. Even in dry years, it hardly ever gets too low, but we have a superabundance of water. We're fortunate people. Water is necessary. It's something you have to have. Now, I have not done much study on water after the Holston Dam came in, but someone else can take that and go with it. I'm an ancient historian, and I do not have much interest after I get to a certain point of several years ago. Somebody can take that up at a later time. It has been very pleasant to be with you today, and I will see you again soon. And until then, I will say to you, may the best in life be yours.